Michigan's Children proudly presents Speaking for Kids, the podcast where we explore crucial conversations impacting the lives of all Michigan children, youth, and families, especially the most vulnerable. Join us each month as we explore public policies and issues in the best interest of our kids and families. We'll bring you lawmakers and policymakers, advocates fighting for change, and the people most affected by those decisions. With our host, Matt Gillard, President and CEO of Michigan's Children, we'll invite you to become engaged too and show you how to take action on what matters most to you. Episodes are recorded live and shared virtually on YouTube and the audio hosting sites Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify.
Hello, I'm Matt Gillard, the President and CEO of Michigan's Children, and your host for Speaking for Kids, a podcast brought to you by Michigan's Children. We're taping this episode on January 9th of 2025. First of all, Happy New Year to all of our avid listeners and followers. And I'm very excited about today's podcast as we have a very special guest, Brian Jordan, with us today. Brian Jordan is a children's book author, but some of you may remember him more prominently as his role as a professional athlete for many years in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Brian has now focused his efforts and his talents on literacy issues through his foundation and his work in Atlanta and really throughout the state of Georgia and beyond. And so we're really happy to have Brian with us today. So Brian, thanks for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure. Especially with the topics that you're talking about, near and dear to my heart. And, if I can help in any way and share my story, yes, this is what I love to do.
Great. Well, why don't we jump in right with that? So why don't you talk us through or talk our audience through a little bit what brought you from a career in professional baseball and the NFL and professional football into into writing children's books, which is fascinating in and of its own right, and then your efforts around advocating for issues like children's literacy.
It all started with a dream. I loved sports growing up, and I wanted to be different. And my difference was I wanted to be a two-sport professional athlete. And so many people doubted me. So many people told me that was unrealistic, but I never gave up on that dream and was fortunate enough to play 3 years in the NFL with the Atlanta Falcons and 15 years of Major League Baseball with the St. Louis Cardinals, Atlanta Braves, LA Dodgers, and Texas Rangers. And after my career, I went straight into broadcasting for 16 years. And I woke up in 2004 with this idea in my head, and it became my first children's book, I Told You I Can Play. And to be honest, I never thought I would be the person that write a children's book because of my struggles with literacy early on in my life. I'm 57 now, but back in my day, they weren't diagnosing dyslexia, which I probably had when I was very young. And as I got older and had kids, my young kid has dyslexia, and we were able to identify it, through some of the great resources of elementary school here in Georgia. And he spent 2 years in a dyslexia school. So very fortunate that we were able to recognize it, and he had the resources to correct it. Now he's at Great Atlanta Christian School and really excelling in education. So I'm so fortunate, but so many kids out there not fortunate. And, that's why I think I got into writing children's books and started my reading challenge to kind of correct that and help it along. Hopefully we can generate those resources in public schools to identify kids with reading challenge and, save their lives because it's important to get to them very young. And my children's books are based on that early childhood reading, and literacy.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's great. And so, no, I couldn't agree more. Right. And I think one of the big, maybe positive outcomes of really what we've learned about education and children's and brain development and young children, especially in early childhood, is the importance of literacy and how the importance of building the steps for literacy really starts at an early age and identifying issues or challenges that young people have, that our youngest people have, our youngest kids have, really gets them on the right track if we can identify and address those issues at an earlier age. And that's something we certainly at Michigan's Children have been focused on And we're happy to see that we're seeing a lot more attention paid to it, at least in our state legislature, and I think nationally as well in Congress, and I know in other states. Talk a little bit more specifically about the work you do with your foundation, and then we can jump into some of these, maybe the policy angle of this a little more around dyslexia and early literacy.
Well, I started my foundation in 1998, and it was really based on education, providing scholarships for those young kids who really wanted to go to college but didn't have the resources. And I started just with my own money. And then all of a sudden, as I got smarter, I started doing golf tournaments and raising more money to provide for scholarships for kids. And I'm going to tell you, the interviews that we've had through homeless kids, really excelling, living in single parent environments and going on to be very successful. So many great stories through my foundation. And so I started with scholarships. And then in 2004, as I said, I wrote my first children's book. And, my mission really, and I felt like it was a gift from God, really, to start writing children's books. And, I'm up to 6 children's books now and really making an impact in elementary schools. Right now, I'm in Richmond County in Augusta, Georgia. I started these programs back in 2018 in Douglas County. And we're starting to see collected data, and we're seeing AR testing scores going up. Kids are starting to read more. And it's all about challenging kids. This reading challenge is nothing but a challenge. Once I share my story and I show the video of me playing 2 professional sports, that's when I know I got them. Because they're sitting there like their eyes are wide open. And we know so many kids want to be professional athletes. They want to be the next LeBron James, Caitlin Clark. So when I walk in that school, I got their attention. And, I really hope more athletes can get involved in the literacy part too, because they have the power to be very impactful. And that's what I'm seeing through my reading challenge. And, kids love it. Not just teaching, or rewarding the top readers or most improved readers, but I'm teaching teamwork. The top first grade class and top second grade class that read the most minutes each quarter, I come back and we play kickball. You get a chance to play me in kickball and the teachers. So, you'll be amazed at the little things that motivate kids to step up to the plate and step up to the challenge. And that's what I'm seeing throughout these programs. And, teachers love it, kids love it, and we're making an impact. And hopefully I can impact the world as I continue to go on and continue to do the reading challenges.
I love it. No, that's great. And I think you're absolutely right. And like we talked about a little before, I mean, literacy really is a national issue, right? I mean, we're up here in Michigan, as a policy advocacy organization, advocating on behalf of more public investment, frankly, into these same types of programs and into these supports and services. But it's getting a lot of attention, right? And like I said, I think this is one of the big advancements that we've seen, globally, even in understanding on, what it takes for kids to be successful in education and then in life, moving on into life. And literacy is right at the front and center in the heart of that. And so there's been a lot of focus from a policy standpoint, a lot of advocacy focus from organizations like ours and a lot of our many partners here in Michigan around these issues. We talked a little bit about dyslexia earlier. Let's jump right into that because that's front and center, or was just front and center here in Michigan. We just passed late last year in our last legislative session some bills centered around dyslexia, and really this grew out of the attention on this issue and the realization that we're not doing nearly enough to screen and to test young people, young kids to recognize that they have it. When we recognize that they do have dyslexia or they are dyslexic, then we know what it takes to actually help them and to remedy that and to get them on the right track where literacy is not a problem. But the unrecognized, or not recognizing it is really where a big challenge is from the public standpoint. And so we passed some legislation that requires testing for dyslexia at an early age in early elementary schools. And then and this isn't just around literacy, this is what we run into with a lot of different issues that we advocate for, is it's all fine and dandy to test for something, but then if you don't also commit the resources to solving the problem once you know it's there, you haven't really solved anything. And so that's where we came in on this issue, and we're going to continue, and this will be an ongoing fight here in Michigan, and I know it's happening in other places as well, is yes, we need to commit, as a public, as through the public entities, through our schools and through our governments, to test young people to make sure that we're identifying and recognizing when they have these challenges, but then we also have to commit the resources to solving them. So talk a little bit about that, what, your history personally, or if you want, with dyslexia or your families, and what you're seeing maybe in Georgia around this issue, and how people are starting to understand the importance of this.
Well, I think you're right on. I think every state understands that we need to recognize these problems. And the preschools and first grade, you have to recognize it early to be able to inform and help. Now, the problem, like you said, is public schools don't have the resources. And I think that's where we need to make a change. I was blessed and fortunate that my son went to a really good, high quality, should I say, elementary school, where they had the regular teacher, but they had a reading teacher also working together. So you had 2 to 3 teachers in the class. So they were able to identify it early enough to where they could share it with the parents, and we could do something about it, have them tested, which the suggestions that they made, get them tested. And if he has it, then you have to find a school. Now, I can tell you this, not everybody can afford a school of dyslexia because it is rather expensive. So yeah, we have to find out other ways to be able to address those problems outside the expensive colleges, should I say, because it was like going to college, paying for a dyslexia school. And we were fortunate, but so many kids in public schools don't have that to fall back on. So we have to find a way to provide them with that and address the problem. And again, when I go into those schools and tell the kids that I probably had dyslexia because I couldn't recognize sounds, letters, and it took me going back, because my mom was an educator and I was a visual learner, like so many kids are visual learners out there. She would read, but she would show me the pictures and I could hear her reading, but I can look at those pictures and so many kids have that same creativity, but can't read. And I had to go back one finger, one word at a time and figure it out. And that's how I sell to the kids. And, to hear the feedback from teachers where that kid is listening to my story and saying, hey, he's like me. And what I want teachers to understand is when kids show out, they get in trouble because they're embarrassed, like I was as a kid. I knew I would get a beating if I go home and get in trouble. So I would put my head down and act like I was sick so I wouldn't get in trouble, but she would not call on me to read. And enough was enough because, I challenged myself as I challenged myself in sports. I love sports. So I had to go back and say, I'm tired of being embarrassed. I'm going to go one finger at a time until I figure out the sounds, the letters. And that finger started getting faster and faster as I kept reading the book over and over. And that's what I encourage kids to do. And I read my book to the kids, and each kid get that book to take home. And I tell them, remember how I read it. And it's really been impactful. And, hopefully I can change many, many lives for these kids.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, absolutely. And and I think, in Michigan, we're maybe a little bit ahead of the curve, because before this dyslexia push and the focus from the literacy effort came on dyslexia, we had passed what was called a 3rd grade reading law. And we've seen this in other states as well. And so the mantra in the education world is up until 3rd grade, you learn to read. After 3rd grade, you need to read to learn, right? And so that's the whole focus, is the idea is that we have to address and identify these issues early and get kids on track to be reading by grade level at or around 3rd grade. Well, that was another fight, like I said before, where it was fine. We could pass this law that says if you're not reading by 3rd grade, you got to be held back. But that doesn't solve the problem if we're not giving the supports and resources to the kids that need them up until 3rd grade. And so that's an ongoing fight that we fight every year in our budget process, is making sure that the public schools that we're fighting to try to get the resources. Now, they still don't have enough, but at least we do have funding for literacy coaches and reading teachers and stuff in some of our public schools in order to address these literacy issues. But it is an ongoing battle. I loved your story about how that's when you got them, when you get the kids, right? Talking about
Yes.
I use that kind of an analogy to that when we talk about interacting with legislators and policymakers, right? And so we're heading into our budget season here in Michigan, where our state's going to be deciding, on our legislature and our governor are going to have to decide on our state budget. And I often tell the story when I'm talking to other advocates or giving advocacy trainings and other things, is that when these legislators, I'm a former, in full disclosure, I'm a former legislator myself 100 years ago. So, but now I'm on the good side of the fence, I like to say. But when these legislators are looking at, deciding these budgets, and they're looking at it as just numbers on a piece of paper, it's hard. We're not going to win. When they look at those numbers and they say, "Oh, those are the kids that I met with a young person who had dyslexia, or somebody like yourself who tells a personal story about their challenges or their family's challenges overcoming," and they put a picture or a face or a name to that number, that's when we got them. Right. And so that's the same type of thing. So what can you tell others maybe that are interested in this issue, that have had history themselves, or just care about kids and wanting kids to learn to read, about how important it is to get engaged and to let your elected officials know, both locally at the state level and the federal level, about the importance of investing in young people and in these types of programs that really can help?
Well, I think you just mentioned it. What really drove me was when I started reading up on the data of literacy. If kids are not reading on the third grade level, over 60 something, almost 70% of those kids end up in jail or the juvenile system. I mean, if that's not a number that's going to wake you up and get your attention, then something's wrong with you. And that's why I'm so eager to go back and help these kids and get them reading by preschool and first grade, because they're going to fall by the wayside, and we're losing too many kids. So I need people to step up and make some decisions on how we can change that. And I think with the resources and the mandatory preschool, which is something that I feel like is so important, every neighborhood should have to put their kid in preschool so that he can start learning very, very early. And that's a huge problem, around the world today, that kids don't go to preschool and then they start first grade behind. And once you do that, it's hard. You're fighting up the mountain. And, it's sad, but that's where I think legislation should jump in and say, hey, every kid born in this world has to go to preschool, start it. And whether it's free, hopefully it can be free for all preschoolers, but that would give them a head start. And I think it could really alleviate that number from 60 something down, cut it in half, hopefully. So I think that's important. That's an important change that we should be fighting for.
Yeah, that's right, man. I think you got to come to Michigan. That's right up our alley as well. We're pushing for universal pre-K here. Our governor's been focused on it, and it's another thing we've been fighting for as well. But no, you're absolutely right. And you talk about those kids entering school behind, and what we found here, and we've actually had kindergarten teachers and first grade teachers testify to this, is that it doesn't only impact those kids that come in that are behind, it impacts everybody, because they're forced to focus more effort and energy and bringing those kids up to where they should be. And even the kids that may have entered kindergarten or first grade ready to go are somewhat impacted by that as well, because the entirety of the system is challenged when you have kids entering or kids falling behind because of lack of resources and lack of access to these programs. And that's exactly what we advocate for. Well, Brian, once again, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank you, first of all, for the work that you're doing. And certainly for, reaching out and agreeing to join us today to have this important conversation. We'd love to have you on again in the future. We can update you on kind of things, how things are going here in Michigan. You can tell us more about good stuff you're doing down there in Georgia. And we can figure out how we can continue to work together to help solve some of these issues and to continue just to raise the energy and raise the attention around these issues. I think that's the most important thing that we can do. When people understand it, when people realize the data like you talked about and how striking it is, we can really make some public change on these areas and really make this this country and this world a better place to be a kid and to raise a family, which is what we're all about.
Well, Matt, thank you, man. And keep up the great work, man. Keep fighting for it. And hopefully we'll get the resources that we need into these schools.
Great, man. You too. All right. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. This is Matt Gillard, your host of Speaking for Kids, the podcast brought to you by Michigan's Children. And tune in again next month for another interesting conversation about an important topic that relates to kids and families here in Michigan and across the country. Thanks.
You've been listening to Speaking for Kids, the podcast for Michigan's Children with host Matt Gillard. Thanks for joining us. To explore these and other issues relevant to our state's children, youth, and families, and to build your advocacy muscle, go to our website at www.michiganschildren.org. You'll find links and news about past and future podcast topics under our Resource tab and action alerts under the Take Action tab. Find and like us on Facebook and Twitter. Terry Bannis and Stephen Wallace produced this podcast. Contact them with your questions and ideas for other topics. Michigan's Children is a nonprofit advocacy organization, an independent voice working to reduce disparities in child outcomes from cradle to career through policy change.